Hi, this is Gleb Bakhmutov. I have an example today that answers a question that comes up again and again, pretty often, I want to say. Imagine we have an API, like this greeting. Well, this API usually responds with hello, but our API is not ready right away. Maybe there is a delay between the start of the server and when this API responds. In this recipe, I simulate this by having a post-reset API endpoint, which randomly picks a number between 1 and 5 seconds. And this API endpoint greeting will only respond after that delay. As you can see, before that delay expires, it responds with 404. So how do I specify from my test, hey, try greetings. If you don't succeed, try it again. If you don't succeed, try it again for, let's say, 6 seconds until the greeting responds, and then continue. Here is my test. Before each test, I reset my API to simulate the delay. Up until at most 5 seconds, my API will be unresponsive. And then I have the test itself. I'm visiting the page, and I'm clicking on a button, and I expect the endpoint to respond, and the application should write hello. Here is my test. I'll click on the spec, and of course it fails, because the API has responded not found, 404. If I click it now, well, it's now ready. If I look at the terminal, I can see that I posted reset API, and the API will randomly respond in seconds, 65 milliseconds. And so when my application is doing it, it gets 404. Let's see how we can wait. The first thing we can do, obviously, is 6-second wait. But this slows down the test. We don't want to wait up to 6 seconds because my API might actually be ready in 4 seconds. Sometimes it's ready in a second, and yet we always wait for 6. So we have to wait, right? Only if we do cypress-request and if API responds with 404. Here's how I can write this function very conveniently using recurse from cypress-recurse. So I want to recurse, and I need two functions. The first function will execute Cypress commands. So in this case, I'll return a Cypress chain by doing cypress-request URL is greeting. That's the URL that my application will request, and that's the URL that's not ready right away. And because it can return 404, I'll say fail on status code false. The recurse cannot have Cypress chains that throw an error or fail. They have to succeed. They have to generate a value. Then we have these brackets. Okay, so this is my first function that runs Cypress commands. I actually need the second function. That's a predicate. So when I get a response from cypress-request, how do I know when I should stop waiting? Well, on response, you have a property, is OK status. Only when this property on response true, then we should stop recursing, because we know the endpoint response success. I get this property by opening the DevTools and actually clicking on request, and I can see that this is what the endpoint has returned. From request, we yield the complete object. So this is where I can inspect the properties, and I can see that if it returns 404, then isOK status is false. Okay, another thing that I need to do, this is pretty fast. So it executes pretty much immediately. I don't want to do that. I don't want to just execute them as quickly as possible. Look, it only takes less than 100 milliseconds to do, which exhausts the default number of iterations, is 30 times, 30 attempts for cypress-recurse. What I want to do is I want to delay. Between every iteration, I want to say, maybe give it, let's say, 500 milliseconds. So now we can see that we tried at 1000 and then around 500 milliseconds later, but still the timeout is too short. The timeout by default uses the default command timeout, which we defined as 1 our API can respond in up to 5 seconds. So I want to say timeout, which is something longer than 5 seconds. So let's say 6 seconds. Aha. So our API said it will take almost 5 seconds. And we can see that when we started, we spent 5 seconds. And then our greeting actually returned 200. Not 44, but 200. We can see it from request. And then we continued with the rest of our test. And one last point right here. We don't want to see all these messages, right? We just want to see the success at the end. So we can say log false because we're not interested in the calls. We just want to see when it was successful. I like keeping those requests logs because we're using cypress-recurse. If I want to hide them completely, I can specify in the options. I should reload the page because I was in an invalid state. Okay, so this is much nicer. We are pinging the endpoint until it responds, and then we continue with our test.